applications. You've seen a number of incidents where developers obviously try to hide a secret in their mobile apps, put them in the public app store, and of course, if you build some security mechanisms around the expectation that you can tell for sure that this call is coming from your app and not some other app, then things start to break down. So yeah, API security in general is something that is very hot. At the end of 2013, there was a survey showing an increased interest in security in the enterprise. CompTIA, I think 56% of CIOs indicated IT security as a top priority. So to me, looking back at 2013, people are waking up. In 2014, it's going to be a lot about mobile security.
So let me just add two
predictions right away, or do we just go around the table?
Yeah.
Go for
So
it,
my prediction would be.
Yeah, sure. Go right ahead. Just give us your thoughts on.
Okay, I'll just speak up. Yeah. So my prediction is, either we're going to see some mobile platforms giving mobile application developers what they're clearly asking for, which is a way to authoritatively know that when an API call is made, this callback home pattern is asserted by the platform that you publish your app on. And either you're going to see something like that, or you're going to see many more instances of private app stores because enterprise want security in their apps. I'm going to shut up now.
So why the App Store? Does that have to do with sandboxing, you think?
Well, it has to do with this, right? It's like I said, letting go of your app. If you put your app on a public app store and there's no mechanism to assert that when the app calls back, it is indeed your app, right? Even though I'm signing this app, there's a developer key involved and things like that. The platform doesn't go up the stack in a way that lets the API developer, assert that as part of the platform. You need to build something into this, and obviously solutions like Layer 7 Mobile Access Gateway, that's part of our focus. But app developers are clearly asking for that right now, and they're making a mistake. So I think step one, realize that there's a problem, right? There's no, it's no surprise that these apps are being hacked and keys are being extracted out of them, and people are exploiting them.
Yeah, I mean, we just saw Snapchat example, right, where I was on the front page of USA Today, right? We're starting to see more and more prevalence. I think, in the recent book from Amazon, or about Amazon, Everything Store, right? There's a whole chapter on APIs. So I mean, it's just whether it's from a security perspective or otherwise, we're just seeing more and more focus on APIs in the mainstream.
So is it security is hard, or is it a second thought because it's just not a development priority, or is it some level of unaware, being unaware how important security is?
I think the enterprise doesn't seem to be making the same obvious mistakes that we've seen, for example, from Matt was talking about Snapchat, right? That's not really an enterprise angle. The other famous one, I think, was in February of 2013. Was a Twitter app, right? So I think the enterprise app developers is maybe a little bit more sensitized to this problem already, but there still is a really big appetite for a solution for that.
Hey, Francois. Do you think OAuth stays on top this year?
I think that aspect of it is not, I don't want to say important. I think that you need syntax to agree on when you build those handshakes and those token provisioning and things like that. I think OAuth is a good enough basis as we need right now, and people are starting to build on top of OAuth, and I think that there's some interest in that. So really what I would say is that I think maybe we have enough of a base to move forward with this, and I don't see much in terms of alternatives that are directly contradicting OAuth. There are things that are building on top of it, but I don't see, something else to displace OAuth. So I don't see it going anywhere right now.
Yeah, I mean, or is it fair to say we're past the tipping point with OAuth, and that just as with HTTP, it's good enough for what it does. It's going to be extended, and it's deeply embedded enough that it's not going to go away, right?
Yeah, it would have been a great topic for a tech talk for 2012 predictions.
So, Francois, how are you feeling? Can we move on maybe to Holger?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or,
I don't want to take too much time here.
Sure.
my turn
Holger,
now.
how are you?
Hanging in. It's late over here.
Yeah, it's true.
I haven't had my beer.
Oh, well, you're allowed to have a beer on the show. Anyway, thanks, Holger.
So what do you want to know? All the things which did not
Well-
happen in 2013?
That were supposed to happen. Maybe some highlights, IoT-wise. What you see as developing in the next year or so.
Well, so 2013 was interesting because in the beginning of 2013 we were the only ones in the API space talking about IoT. I think at the end of
Good point.
2013 everyone is talking about IoT, but there hasn't been, and now comes the interesting part, there hasn't been an iPhone moment for IoT. Hasn't happened in 2013, right? There was no iconic single thing which kind of shows the what IoT really is, right? It's all kind of hype right now, buzzwords. Everyone gets on the bandwagon. No one tries to be left behind. I think right now we really see the hype cycle building up. You see it. It's hard to read any kind of article without the reference to IoT anymore. And I'm a little bit. Yeah.
So is Google buying Nest for $3 billion of the potential?
That's 2014. That's 2014.
Oh, sorry. I'm mixing it up. I need sleep.
Yeah. So that's an interesting acquisition, and I tried to run the numbers. I don't know how $3 billion comes together. It's certainly an acquisition, I think, which highlights what people like to see in IoT. But if you ask me personally, I think there are so many ways how that acquisition can go completely wrong. I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure if this is really going to be the iPhone moment. It's probably going to be the moment where you see like valuations skyrocketing. I mean, we saw ThinkWorks being acquired. We saw a while ago. We saw PatchPay being acquired and turned into Cively and stuff like that. So there's a lot of big guys getting into the market, kind of throwing money around. I don't think they're any closer in knowing how they're going to make money on it. And right now, the connected home seems to be like the thing everyone jumps on. Seems to be the most obvious one. I don't know if that's actually going to work. I mean, I read some reviews from the CES. I wasn't there this year. That pretty much the connected appliances were all kind of huge letdowns and just gimmicks, just things people did because they could, but without actually addressing a need. But what I did find interesting is, so for 2014, I wonder what happened to the hype if maybe what we call IoT is just a constant development of more and more connectedness without any kind of noticeable iPhone moment. Things will just happen, but there won't be a time or a point where we look back and saying, oh, this is when it was created, right? It might just simply creep up on us. A lot of wrong turns along the way and a few right ones, and I think in a couple of years, I think connected car seems to be the one area where a lot of focus and where you kind of see for the first time manufacturers and IT kind of coming together. There were a lot of announcements on this at the CES around connected car. We have been involved in some of them. So maybe it's going to be the car. Maybe the car is going to be the first kind of pole in the ground around which IoT can kind of build itself up. But there's another aspect, and you guys touched a little bit with the Snapchat snafu. I think there were two very interesting incidents just in the last few months. First incident, and Ronnie, you might have read that. I don't know how much it made it across the ocean. Was a very ingenious way on how people attacked ATMs. They essentially drilled in holes, inserted USB sticks, and essentially jailrooted the ATMs to run their software. A very sophisticated attack, very successful. And then the other one, which happened just, I think, maybe around the Christmas time, was the Target, where you saw the point-of-sales devices being exploited, and huge number of credit cards being siphoned off. And now, okay, ATMs are kind of a special thing, right? It's a Windows XP, it's a full-blown platform. But point of services is a much more constrained, much more kind of IoT-like device, right? Single-purpose device. So I think what we're going to see is more and more of those exploits as more and more of those things get connected and in effect become exploitable, become smart, but you can fool them. And I think that's a very interesting. I think there are some very interesting, let me call it, attack vectors suddenly possible. You know, I think the Target exploit, I mean, with a RAM scanner, I wouldn't have thought of that. So I think we'll see more of that. And maybe Nest will be one, maybe Tesla will be one. I mean, who knows, right? But I think that whole area of new vulnerabilities is going to massively increase. I mean, that vulnerability there is just massive. And I think it goes back to what Francois said, right? Because security is kind of seen as an afterthought, right? It's bolted on at the last minute when they say, well, you know, we should maybe add password to it or something. Oh, let's just hard code it, because who would think that there's a hard coded password in there, right? And so for 2014, I think plenty of security scares and security exploits, especially in the IoT area where everyone now jumps into.
I think the discussion is shifting that way too. I think Nest is part of it. Not only the security and vulnerability aspect, but the privacy aspect, right? I've seen a lot of backlash around the acquisition of Nest now, with people saying, oh, you know, I was okay to trust this small little friendly company, but now if Google's going to be snooping on my wall through my thermostat, you know, I'm ripping it off the wall. So it's really, I think that is shifting. I think with all the, you know, the social network explosion of the last 10 years and all the proliferation of data, I think IoT now, with people and the NSA stories that are out there, I think the discussion is shifting, and I think it's inverting the whole idea of sharing. And even though we live in an inevitably open data world now, people are much more concerned about privacy. And I think being able to offer solutions that enforce the privacy and protect against the vulnerabilities is fundamental and a big opportunity space for not just this year, but many years to come. I think
it will be interesting, right? Because you will need to have a compelling enough value attached to it that people forego convenience, right? I think that's always the challenge. It's convenience versus privacy, and yeah, that's another aspect why I think that acquisition might not have been such a smart move, at least for the potential of Nest, because honestly, I won't trust it. You know, that data pile just sits there. I mean, maybe they're gonna not touch it the next couple of months when attention is on it, but at some point you're almost liable not touching it if it presents value, right? I mean, you're supposed to maximize value. So, but that's a whole different discussion. So I want to leave some of the other guys
we're all
speaking.
In trouble. This is a Google Hangout. We're all in trouble. They're coming
That's
out.
right. They're flagging the word Nest.
Yeah, right. Over and
so
over.
security and privacy are kind of two themes so far that are coming out, I suppose. And they're related, I guess.
And yeah, so Holger, good job finding the angle for public versus private client that I was talking about earlier. It's very true. The same thing might happen for somebody who builds an ATM or a point of sale, right? You expect this to be a confidential client, and if you forget that somebody can hack into it and just steal your secret, it's exactly the same problem. And Matt, what you were saying about the privacy issues and the whole creepiness, if you want, of Internet of Things, I was never concerned about that until this week. My son got a Furby for Christmas, and the Furby went to school with my son, and my son came back at the end of the day and told me that his other friend brought their Furby and somehow caught the cold that the Furby of my son had. So do we really want things talking between themselves behind our backs on the internet? Maybe 2014 is going to be the year we're going to remember, put a date on it. 2013 was the first step towards the Skynet.
Yeah. Well, and there's nothing creepy about Furbies at all. Not at all. Oh boy. All right, who's up?
Hey, Steve, back to you.
So yeah, Matt. I mean, you've been making some comments and stuff along the way, but you've got the floor if you want to talk about 2013. I know you do. You're customer facing a lot, so I know you probably have a really good idea of the issues that were going on in 2013 around API management, security, and what the kind of priorities are going forward. Maybe you could give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I view 2013 as the big year for the convergence of the open web and the enterprise around API management. So, worked with many clients, many big clients who were looking at, coming from the perspective of, we went down the SOA path and it bore some fruit, but it also gave us a set of headaches. We understand what API management has to offer. We're looking enviously at these big web companies like Salesforce and Amazon and Google, but we've been hurt before. We once bitten, twice shy. But a lot of companies in industries that are not so traditionally focused on APIs really getting into the space and getting value out of it. And I think starting to really influence the dialogue around how APIs are being designed and the kind of the school of thought around APIs. So, whether it's companies in manufacturing or companies in insurance, really taking what these startups have done and taking what was built for the long tail and applying it to their own practical issues, as opposed to just having focus on those open web APIs, focusing more on internal stuff and how they can just kind of optimize their own internal integration, and especially also optimize the way that they integrate with partners, and almost coming from the legacy B2B world, things that you would have done through document exchange in the past or file exchange, getting much more heavily into a much more dynamic API integration approach. So that's going to continue, I think, heavily in 2014, but I think 2013 was really the year where we saw that happen in earnest.
So Matt, you think this is this primarily a sort of a consolidation? You talk about this notion of open in the enterprise kind of deal. Is this sort of taking what we've learned and putting it into the enterprise, or is this something actually pretty new?
No, I think a lot of it is taking what we've learned and putting in the enterprise, but then there's a feedback loop because of some of the factors that are important in the enterprise that haven't been factored in, like we were talking about security, or we get into scalability, or we get into the realities of the life cycle. So I see almost a parallel progression of what's happening around APIs and what's happening around DevOps. They're both, what enterprises are doing is looking at, hey, why is it that Facebook can have 1 billion users and incredible uptime? How is it that Amazon can come into the market in a new segment and instantly become the leader or close to the leader and threaten, these companies that have been around for ages. And I think all these big enterprises are saying, how do we get more agile, and how can we deliver more quickly? And so they're looking at how they can optimize their processes around DevOps, and they're also looking at how they can optimize their infrastructure. And so, what's happening with APIs and DevOps comes together, and with the same goals, different tools but same goals.
Yeah, so a lot of that seems social, right? Or communal, like changing the community, changing the values, changing the behavior inside enterprise.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and we use still the same pitfalls that were there for SOA, because a lot of the goals are the same.
Yep.
The pitfalls are still there. Companies are going to come and pay money and buy a tool, buy a piece of technology, and say, there, we're done, right? Well, now we're modern. Now we're like Twitter. But it doesn't work that way, and that's why I think, that, as you know, right, we collectively are looking at how we can take all these lessons together and deliver holistic solutions to clients that want to see the bigger picture, want to take actionable pieces of information and apply it to their own environments. And so I think that there's a lot to be done there. And the key message is, and it's really the foundation of the API Academy, is that we have to cover all the bases, and we have to be pragmatic, right? We're not going to go in to to some legacy pharmaceutical company and tell them they have to blow up their whole technology organization and move it to Palo Alto and hire a bunch of grads and have working hours are now Friday nights with pizza and beer. Not all going to happen immediately like that, right? It has to be a progression. It has to factor in the realities of the organization and the strength of the organization, right? Because what may be a strength and a very visible positive aspect of what these startups are doing could be full of weakness, as we've seen with some of the security issues that have come out of the Bay Area. That enterprise technology people would say, how could you miss that one? Right, like a lot of the discussion around. I hate to keep harping on Snapchat, but they could have had the $3 billion from themselves. But anyway, but it's like they're saying, well, you can't protect against these attacks. That was the defense coming out. Well, we're sorry it happened, but we couldn't protect against it. Yes, you can. Like if you use the most basic cryptographic mechanisms out there. And even if you come in with a mindset of, this is our internal API for a mobile app, and treat it that way. Anyway, I've said my rant.
I just want to remind the viewers, people listening in, that feel free to make a comment or ask a specific question about any of the comments the panel are making. I just wanted to double check that the chat window is working. I know a couple people made some comments early about the sound. That seems to be fine. So we definitely invite your comments and questions. So just as a reminder, and if for whatever reason you're more comfortable on Twitter, you can tweet us just at @Layer7 or with the hashtag Layer7Live. So Mike.
You want to do me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so 2013, I think, from my standpoint, I think everybody kind of knows I focus a lot on interaction, been talking a lot about the hypermedia pattern for interaction in applications. And I've seen a real uptick in 2013 in the use of the word, right? So I can remember, back in 2009, 10, 11, when we talked about this, it was, this sort of very odd thing. Now, not a day goes by when I see people talking either on Twitter, social media, or somewhere about hypermedia. So I think that's a good sign. It shows an awareness of this idea, an awareness of this style or this pattern, which is, I think, pretty cool, because I think it offers a lot of possibilities. Ronnie and I were talking earlier. I think that 2013 might actually be sort of the hype year for hypermedia. It's like sort of reaching some point. Of course, if you follow the pattern, that means that the next step in the hype cycle is trough of disillusionment. So I think we're actually heading for some of that. I think seeing when I look at what people are building, because people ask me some questions and I kind of keep an eye on things. There's a lot of use of the word, but not a lot of use of the technical detail. So I think we may be doing the same thing we did with SOA and the same thing we did with REST and all these other things. In other words, we sort of adopt the coat, but not actually the attitude. So there may be some interesting challenges in 2014 in that space. I remain positive. There's still so many people that are starting to create formats, create patterns, and even now I'm starting to see some libraries, which I think could make it a whole lot easier because you don't have to be a rocket scientist anymore. Holger and I were talking about this a while back. I've seen a renewed interest in the notion of SDKs, and I think Holger was talking a little about that earlier. And those SDKs can sort of lower the barrier of entry to getting some of this stuff done. Right now, Hypermedia is a very technical, very detailed kind of thing that's rather costly to put together. So, so I think 2013 was an interesting period for that kind of interaction and Hypermedia pattern. I think 2014 will either see some consolidation of that, some libraries, some some real creative thinking in that area, or we might see some real frustration in the space. In other words, it may turn out that simply adopting the word and using some of the same patterns don't save us anything, actually cost us more to build, and don't give us a lot of improvements. So there could be an interesting period. I think we'll probably see more of this SDK pattern, this idea of actually having pluggable units. I think in another area to kind of touch on this notion of IoT, I like sort of what Holger was talking about, the idea that it may just actually be this slow creep rather than some magical moment. To talk about the iPhone thing, the magic about iPhone is there were no buttons. It was like, holy crap, you could do that? You could actually do this and take away everything and it still works? That was sort of the light bulb moment when we reduced things down in a fundamental way. I'm not sure if we'll get that for IoT, as Holger was saying, but we still might have some sort of watershed. Somebody might figure out a way to use this notion of tiny things to talk to each other in some really fundamentally creative way, some different way we're not doing. Right now, we're kind of doing the same thing over and over again. Early jets had straight wings, and they didn't actually take advantage of things for a long time. Early cars looked like horseless carriages. They actually look like you took the horse off and it's a car. So we're very often doing the same thing. We sort of we kind of reinvent what we already have, except with this new technology. And until somebody has that moment, it may be tough. I think 2014 will also see more in this tiny device space. So I think we're going to see cases where people are building a small device that does one thing and one thing well. Nest is kind of an example of that if you set aside the acquisition. But there are lots more of these. There's a great company called Qubit that has these little pluggable things that magnetize together. One's a power source, one's a light sensor, one's a wheel, one's a motor, and you kind of put these together and you can build things with them. I think we'll start actually doing that with applications as well. And I think that's when we'll end up hitting on the privacy problem. Right? A lot of these devices actually send data to the cloud and then back to some other device. I've got like a thing in my shoe that tracks information. It's sent to the cloud and then comes down to the cloud and talks to my phone. And I think that's a real problem. That shoe needs to talk to my phone. I think we'll have more of these personal networks, more of these closed spaces, more of these spaces where I might actually be able to validate all the devices are actually mine. So I think a lot of the things that Francois was talking about, this notion of having a deeper stack of this identification, may actually make some of these small devices work better together. So I think those things. I think we need to be ready for this disillusionment in Hypermedia. I think we'll see more SDKs. I think we'll see more of these small devices that do just really, really simple things. I saw Mark Andreessen talking about that, specifically about cars in the last week. And I think that'll actually give us lots and lots of opportunity to do some very creative stuff in the next year.
Very cool. I hear this a couple of times from Holger and you, like the not this iPhone moment for IoT or the Internet of Things. So is it sort of like the Internet actually of the 90s that sort of emerged rather than was launched onto the scene, like, and then everybody plugged in? It's like, wow, there's this thing called the Internet. We're all going to use it, and browse and talk to each other, buy things, but it just sort of merged.
Yeah.
You know, is there a similarity there, or is that
Well, yeah, I think there's some.
not
You know,
the same thing?
yeah, we had the internet for quite a while, and remember, we had all these proprietary ways of talking, right? So Microsoft had their own way of doing it, and AOL had their own way of doing it, and CompuServe and the Source and all these early products. And then suddenly we got HTML, which you didn't have to be a rocket scientist to do. And people said, "Oh crap, you could do that? I can just like, you know, write these little angly things and put it somewhere, and people can see it, and people can interact with it." You know, I think we may end up having something like that, but it may take a while. It was about 10 years or so with that internet, right? The HTML and HTTP are 20 years old this year, I think, or they just crossed 20. So we may still have some time on our hands before we find that thing. I think it's there, but I'm not sure that I have any idea what that would look like.
Okay.
I got a question, Mike.
Yeah.
I don't want to put you on the spot. What about like OData or any other, you know, stack coming up with something to try to grab that you know, higher level or added value, added layer of abstraction, if you want, on top of the core REST that people were doing, or the core hypermedia. You know, like it seems like in the past a lot of big players have been trying to grab this. You know, like, okay, we're going to come up with this added layer of abstraction, we're going to bake that into our platform. It's going to come with Visual Studio. I don't want to name names, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. So what do you think? Is the same thing going to happen with OData? Do you see anything that could you know, prevent that or maybe slow it down?
Well, yeah, this actually it's a really good point, and it sort of speaks to a project I know Holger's working on as well. We've talked a little bit about this. One of the cool things about the notion of OData is that it lowers the barrier of entry to getting data out and doing something with it, right? OData basically is a version of the Atom service from the early 2000s that's tuned specifically for a particular platform, a particular tool set. It's got some challenges in some technical details, but it's got a really big appeal. We also have, I just talked to a company just a few weeks ago that's also doing a similar thing where they actually read stuff on the net and they use things like semantic tagging and stuff like that to create sort of tables live. You don't even need to use OData. You use their product to read a web page, and it sort of treats it as a table. Who was it? The guy that's at eBay. Subbu Alamaraju has this thing called something.io. Does anybody remember what that is? It basically treats the whole internet like a select statement. We love this data manipulation language. You love the way of thinking about that. I definitely think there are possibilities there. The challenge is that a lot of the stuff that we want to do isn't just data passing. It's more than just getting the data. It's doing something with it. And communicating that doing something with it is a real challenge. So having some kind of add-on to exposed data, I think, is probably the way to go. And there are lots of projects on that. I don't know, Holger, if you want to talk about that as well, because you're like right up in that space right now, right?
Yeah, but even though a lot of that stuff is well, actually, it's hypermedia, right? It's attaching metadata to the structure. I mean, the one thing we had this email exchange, I think, earlier is JSON collection, for instance, right? And it's this one format. Every developer, and I got it from your book. Every developer, how often do we have to implement collections in an API, right? And there it is, and a wonderful format which has, you cannot just simply get the entries or understand the list format. You even have a template how to create new ones. And when I saw it, that was actually one of the things where I kind of had put hypermedia a little bit also in the hype corner. With that format, you actually got me, and I kind of saw, okay, there's potential here. Now, I have my problems with OData. You know, I'm not going to admit I'm a big fan of it, but I think the idea behind it is something we seem to be revisiting with every single technology cycle, right? I mean, think about all the WS star standards, right? Creating standards for interoperability, to create standards to know what each field interprets. It's just I'm as a developer in me, on one hand, REST gives me the freedom to think, but with that comes a lot of having to think. So I think there's always a tendency to, make it easier. I don't have to think anymore. But then it becomes constraining, and then I move to something which again lets me think, right? So it's always this cycle in the industry, which maybe it's just natural. Maybe we're optimizing towards something which we took things from SOA, which are still present in REST, right? Maybe there are now things in REST we take with us on the next journey to Hypermedia, and maybe there are things we take from there and go somewhere where we haven't added buzzword yet.
Yeah, I think that looking for the ultimate protocol or something like that, maybe it's at the wrong point, because Holger, I think taking the developer's perspective is fundamental here, and that if it's a nice protocol that's easy to use, that's great. If there's a tool set that abstracts it because it's not such a nice protocol, that works too. But the whole idea, and this is something that also I think as we go on this journey of convergence with the enterprise and the open web, is a big deal, is this emphasis on the developer and the developer experience. And it's something that I think, Ronnie, you've spent a lot of time exploring as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So do you want to, Ronnie? Do you want to have your turn and talk about 2013? And I know you do all with Mike as well, the API design workshops, and you guys did a ton of those in 2013, and there's a few kind of all-day ones coming up in 2014. And then I just want to remind, because we are sort of getting towards the end of the time, that we want to answer Niranjan's question. I know he's on the stream, so he's been waiting patiently. So, Mike, do you have those?
No, I don't have them in front of me right now. If you want to remind me or pass a window to, and Ronnie can get started, and then I'll answer.
Sure. Okay.
All right. So when we look at 2013, and it's awesome being last, right? Because now I have to struggle to come up with something. But 2013. I think at the beginning of 2013, we were still explaining why you might do this, what it was, right? What the word means, why it's different from what it meant 5 years ago. And then somehow, within a short space of time, by the end of 2013, people are coming up to us and talking about APIs, right? Asking us about APIs specifically, talking about things like hypermedia. If you ask a room in January 2013 about hypermedia, a few hands go up. You ask them in December, maybe half the audience's hands go up. So we've seen this dramatic increase in understanding. What that means, I think, for 2014, though, is you kind of have to go beyond that. So what I've noticed from businesses, where before they were enchanted by innovation and monetization, they want more now, right? Businesses are asking technology teams, if we're going to fund an API program, show us a strategy, show us how it aligns with our broader corporate or business strategy. Sure. It's not enough just to dangle this stuff as carrots. So there's needs to be more meaning. I think it goes the same with usability. Early on, we kind of differentiate APIs from SOA by saying they're for developers, that we think about the developer perspective. And then we sit down and we design them the exact same way we used to before, right? So we say it, but then we don't actually do anything about it. What I expect for 2014 is an increased focus on that part. And it can go two ways. I think it's very similar to what Mike talked about with hypermedia. We're either going to find out it's not worth the trouble, because to actually incorporate aspects of usability, there's too much of a design cost, so people don't do it. Or we're going to start getting some real concrete methods, some real concrete processes for doing this in the API world. But beyond all of that, I'm expecting just a continued increase of consumer demand for interoperation. They're not going to say APIs, right? But they're going to buy something, whether it's software, service, or a product, or a personal analytics device or a light, and just expect it to work with other things, right? I think that's changed a lot in 2013, and it's going to keep going in 2014. And by the end of 2014, if you're making a product and it doesn't work with other products, people are going to be mad at you. But there's kind of an implicit thing there. What it doesn't mean is that everyone has to have a public API, right? And that's kind of where we were a year ago. I think what's becoming apparent is the platforms that are popular need to be supported by you. So it kind of encourages more of a partner API space than public space. I think public is still going to be important, but we might see a little bit of clawback. So where everyone was trying to figure out the public space and support 100,000 developers, now maybe we're going to be focusing as big businesses on supporting 15 to 20 key partners and their developer communities, right? And it actually changes things a little bit in terms of how we approach design and strategy. And I do want to throw in a couple of wildly speculative. No one's really taking a chance here, right? We're all doing safe predictions. So I think, how about for one, I predict security will somehow become less of an issue. I think we're becoming desensitized about things like privacy. There's going to be certain cases like financial institutions, banks, where there's money involved and security has to be to the max. But I think there's going to be a seed is going to be sown that we have to do cost-benefit analysis on these things. You don't secure things just for the sake of securing it, right? That maybe the cost of being on the front page is okay in some contexts because you're not going to lose that much money, right? That's pretty controversial, right? So let's see. And I thought I had another one, but I can't remember it right now. So that's, I think, good enough, right? And no one's going to remember this a year from now, I hope, when I'm
I'm recording.
Yeah, well, maybe in a year we can look back and say, how were your predictions on 2014?
No, you never told me that before. That's fine. All right.
BlackBerry is going to come back in 2014.
Yeah, that's a bold prediction. Good job. Well, Ronnie, great. Thanks for taking a chance. That's an interesting perspective.
I mean,
and kind of an answer to the question is in some of these applications like Snapchat and whatnot, where it seems that security is kind of an afterthought. Maybe it's not worth it to them.
There's one other thing I want to add now. Looking back at 2013, and probably something Mike could speak a lot about. I never would have predicted that we would see more description languages come up, right? That in January, I never would have said this would be the year that someone comes up with this description language and this one and this one. Did you feel the same, Mike, or did you have an inkling that might have happened?
Actually, I was quite surprised at the explosion. I kind of referred to it. I'm working on some research on it now. I sort of referred to it as the Cambrian explosion of service descriptions. We had one description in 2001. We got the second one in 2007. I think the third one was 2009. That was Waddle. And now, just in the 2013 alone, I think we got 4 new ones. So we have more than a dozen now, which means it's an important issue. And actually, I think it relates to what you said, which is about this notion of working together, the sort of notion of interoperability rather than integration. As long as we can describe things to each other in a meaningful way, and that's really part of what OData tries to do. OData uses this thing called CSDL, this conceptual schema, description language. Everybody's trying to figure out, I think, to do some of what you're talking about, that notion of out of the box, I should be able to work with somebody else. And so I think that's why these things are blowing up. I think many of the examples I've seen in the last year might be barking up the wrong tree. We might actually be making the same mistakes we made in 2001. But I think it's a really interesting space, and that there's a wild notion. There may actually be a consolidation in that space, a sort of a winner in 2014. That's an out on the limb kind of experience. We have more than a dozen now. We might see people converge around 1 or 2 that aren't WSDL. Right now, WSDL turns out to actually be the most popular and still the most used, and for a lot of reasons, the best. But I think there may be another one emerging. Who knows?
So to really go out on a limb, you have to name it. You have to guess who's going to win.
Well, I don't think I'm going to go that far out. I think you're setting me up.
But isn't this description language, and you mentioned WSDL, right? And again, putting my developer hat on. The one thing I loved about WSDL was I could just throw it into tooling, and I got the client stubs out of it, right? And we have mentioned just in this hour alone, right? We talked about SDKs, we talked about client libraries, we talked about interoperability, we talked about, I mean, for better or for worse, WSDL worked.
Yes.
Right? You could actually use it. So, and I think maybe we see this Cambrian explosion because that was the one aspect of SOA and SOAP which is deeply appealing, because guess what? Developers are mostly, I don't want to call them lazy, but let me just call it that, right? Things we know how to implement, we have done multiple times. We don't want to repeat, right? And WSDL was a great way to kind of get this stuff done, and then do the fun bits, the interesting pieces. And,
yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree 100%. I think one of the things that WSDL does is it lowers the barrier of entry, right? I don't have to be a rocket scientist. I don't have to be a protocol guru in order to build an application that works over the web, and that's a huge advantage. And one of the other big things is WSDL is such a machine-readable form that it's good for tooling. I can actually generate WSDL from an existing base of code for a server. I can consume WSDL and generate code for a client from that WSDL, and those two things work together. Who wouldn't like that? I mean, that's what we need more of. We need better tooling. I've said this before, Hypermedia's biggest problem is it has no tooling. Everybody has to do this stuff by hand, and unless that problem is solved, that's where the real trough of dissolution that's going to start, when people realize there are no good tools for Hypermedia, and unless that changes, that thing is just going to go by the wayside. So I think you're exactly right. There's a good reason that WSDL worked, and there's a good reason that it still works. I mean, we have hundreds of customers that continue to use it and have no plans, according to our surveys, have no plans to get rid of it because it's good. Yeah, I think you're right.
So maybe we should actually, some of those people who are investing into describing REST, what I would really like to see, and I'm not quite sure if I'm going to see it in 2014, all this async kind of transport protocols or eventing, right? IoT is a lot about PubSub protocols, etc. I don't think anyone has ever tackled to describe a PubSub protocol in this kind of language.
That's interesting. That's a really good point. So that's actually sort of a challenge, right? So there's PubSub exists in lots of places, but do any of these description languages actually make that happen? Actually describe that specifically? And I think you're right. I don't know of any right now. I'd love to hear about it. Well, so I mean, there's people have to be listening who know all these, and I'd love to see if we can do that. That's a good one.
Yeah, we're going to create it. It's going to be called JSync.
Yes.
I think I remember.
You heard it first.
I think I remember that there was some WSDL binding for MQ back in the days. But yeah, so you have MQTT, you have CoAP, you have even XMPP. I mean, there's a whole suite of protocols out there which are used today to drive building automation, to drive in the military, but there's no description language.
Yeah, that's good. That's
Matt,
very good.
you're going to show us something, or you just disappear?
Yeah. You disagree so much that you have to walk off? Did you just drop the mic and walk off stage?
Okay, so that's awesome, guys. Thank you so much. I think because it's getting towards the top of the hour, maybe we can have a stab at Niranjan's questions.
Yeah.
Just because he's been waiting a long time.
Sure.
So
I've got them in front of me here.
Oh, you got them in front of me. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I won't have
So
to read
I think his questions, he had 3 questions actually, and they centered around Hypermedia and RDF, I think. Considering RDF is based on dereferencing entities, modeled as triples, shouldn't it inherently support this follow your nose in Hypermedia, things like that. And I'll say a couple of things. In a project that I worked on last year with a guy by the name of Leonard Richardson, a really, really smart guy, we actually took a look at RDF and spent some time comparing it to how Hypermedia works. Matt's upstaging me right now. And RDF is actually a real challenge because most of the formats, whether it's N3 or Turtle or typical RDF XML, while they use a lot of URLs or URIs, they don't do a really good job of describing interactions for Hypermedia. So you don't see a lot of Hypermedia RDF right now because it's not too good at describing it. I think an exception to that rule that we pointed out was a format called Hydra. So Hydra actually allows you to describe some rather detailed interactions using JSON LD, which is a kind of an offshoot of RDF. I still like Matt Baker's RDF Forums, which is now probably more than 10 years old, and I think he pointed out there was something else recently. So there may be some things coming up. Now that Hypermedia is getting this hype, is getting this attention, I think the RDF community or the linked data community, which are kind of related, are actually thinking more about this. So I think it's possible, but I don't see any clear winners at the moment. The one that impresses me most is this thing called Hydra, which is from Marcus Lelenthaler, and it's based on JSON LD. So it's definitely a possibility, but I don't see any winners yet.
Okay, so Niranjan, thanks for the questions, and I hope that answers them. If you have any follow-ups, you know, just resend them through email, and I'll make sure to forward them on over to Mike, and continue the discussion that way. So thanks, guys. It's 10 o'clock or whatever time it is in Germany or London. What time is it there? 6 p.m.? 7?
6.
6. Okay. It looks like Matt has disappeared.
Yeah, but we saw his little one.
Oh,
Yeah.
I missed that. Too bad. But thanks so much, guys. Thanks everybody who was on the stream. Appreciate it. Great predictions. We'll have the replay up hopefully later on today, and we'll share that link out, tweet it, and just want to say thanks again for your time. The Hangout worked pretty well. I was pretty impressed with the format. Nobody fell off. The sound was pretty good. The video was good. Thanks, Holger, for taking one for Google Plus. And thanks so much for all your thoughts and insights on you know, the topic of API predictions for 2014. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
See you guys.
See you guys.